I hope you're having a really good day. This is Dan, and in today's lesson I'm going to talk to you about something that's really important, and that's practice. And there are, broadly speaking, 3 different types of practice routines. And I'm going to tell you what's the very, very best for you, so stick around for that. Take a look at this. This is a very, very highly structured 30-minute bass guitar practice session. This comes from a course of mine, and in the course it details like everything that you need to learn, and it's very structured, and it's very like, do this in this order. And for some people that's really good, especially beginners. Let's just quickly go through some stuff. So at the beginning here, you can see on the left here we've got different sort of categories of music, if you like. Technique, theory, timing. We're combining them here in a 10-minute little section. So the little principle here is just splitting up your practice time, okay, into little different areas. So for example, you might have something like this. This is an exercise that I like that's on my site. It's just a harmonized major scale, and you can use these arpeggios for all kinds of bass lines, walking bass, all kinds of different things. So what we're doing in this section of the practice routine is we're working on technique. You know, I'm using my third finger to little finger. That's a weakness for many people, so practicing that. I'm also combining it into theory. You know, I've got C major 7, D minor 7. Do I know what these things mean? If not, I'm practicing them in this section. And then I might get a metronome out, you know, and work on my timing at the same time. You can see it's structured. Fretboard knowledge next. As bass players, we really need to know that. So let's say we've got a new pattern. That's one I really like. It's a major pentatonic with an added dominant 7th. If you like soul or R&B, you'll love that pattern. So maybe I don't know that pattern. In this portion, I'm working on that. Then I've got here reading. Now, this isn't, you don't take this as gospel. Everyone's at a different level, a different path on their journey, and a different place on that path. So what you're going to be practicing is going to be very, very different to what someone else might be practicing. So this is just like a guideline. And this idea of this structured practice is just that. It's like it's a routine. It's sort of mapped out. And that would be loosely what I describe as the first type of practicing. The second would be unstructured. So this is where you don't really have any kind of military outline like we did in the previous one. This is where you just sort of play, you maintain your technique, perhaps you learn songs. This type of practicing is, I think, what a lot of people do, and I'm absolutely not saying it's bad. For beginner players or players just coming back into the bass after years away, I think this type of unstructured, unfocused practice can sometimes be a problem. Because if you're just starting the bass, sometimes you're like, I don't actually know what I'm supposed to be playing. I can't just learn the tune. How am I supposed to do that, right? So this sort of unstructured thing, which is probably how I practice mostly now, because I've learned my patterns and a lot of the sort of nuts and bolts of music. Not to say that I shouldn't practice in a structured way often, which I do when I'm learning new things. But in this section, I would say this sort of unstructured way of playing is really good for anyone who is, you know, playing regularly, composing regularly, or making up bass lines or recording. Because that's your practice, okay? And along the way, when you're writing or when you're playing in bands, you have to learn a new tune. You might then go, right, there's this song that's got a slap bass line. I can't play slap. Then you have to go back to a little bit more of that structured approach where you're like, you know, you've probably had this before, where you need to study a scale, or you need to sit down and go, like, what do I actually have to do to slap? Okay, bony part of the thumb, and you're just sitting down for like 10 minutes, maybe every day for like 2 weeks before you see any kind of progress whatsoever. So that would be like moving from a bit more of an unstructured to a structured approach. Let me now talk about the sort of third type of practice. This is what I call the Will Lee approach. Will Lee is one of the great session bass players of all time, played in David Letterman's band, probably was playing from the 80s to when that gig stopped for him, which was a couple of years ago, maybe a bit more. He was probably playing bass at an incredibly high level every single day, multiple times a day. And I remember reading an interview with him where someone said, you know, what do you practice? He said, I don't practice. And he doesn't need to practice because A, he's reached an incredible level and he's playing with all kinds of different musicians all the time. Now, that is great, that approach. If you're a professional musician and you're playing a lot, go for it. But for those people who aren't, I would say this, you know, it's kind of like the learning on the job approach, okay? Where you've got most of your skills down and maybe there's something that comes up that's a bit difficult, but you'll be able to adapt because of your skills. I wouldn't recommend that if you're a beginner, because are you in a band? Are you playing every day? Probably not. Which leads to the question, which of those three is the best for you? Now, the best practice routine is simple. It's the one you stick to. If you absolutely hate the structured, regimented approach that I talked about in the first sort of section, you don't do that, right? You need small wins. You need momentum. You need to enjoy this thing, okay? Equally, I know plenty of people, everyone who's doing my course, it's called From Beginner to Bassist. Those people take that course because they need structure. They absolutely need structure and routine. And that's definitely, especially if you're learning online, you need that. You need, like, this is what you learn, this is how you do it, this is when you do it. And then you gain a bit of momentum, you gain a bit of knowledge, and after you gain the knowledge, you can then start to direct your own study a little bit more, maybe move into that more unstructured approach, okay? But ultimately, you have to find what works. How much time do you have? How consistent can you be? There are no shortcuts. You do need to put the time in. You do need to be consistent. You know, muscle memory is only built upon repetition. Okay, there's no way around that. But you must find what works for you. I'm a big advocate of writing stuff down and sort of writing goals and targets and just tackling them with little tiny chunks every day. You will compound your skills if you do little bits every day. I know this video was a talking one. I usually do this is how you play XYZ. So, you know, do check out my channel, different playlists, different elements of music. If you are interested in that course, it says From Beginner to Bassist. And it's, if you're like a complete beginner or someone coming back to bass, it will start you off, okay? And then quite soon you'll move into sort of higher level concepts like how to use theory to make bass lines up, okay? It's very good if you're a little bit lost and if you a little bit don't really know what you need to learn and which direction you need to do. That course will take you up to a level, and maybe you're at this level already and you don't need the course, where you can start to sort of have a little bit more of a say about where you're headed as a bass player. That's that sort of more unstructured approach. The more you play, the more you get better, the more you will understand all the different elements that make up good bass playing. You'll get connections in your mind that will help you to become a better player. And from that point, you'll be able to dictate your progress a lot better. Having a teacher, doing courses and all that kind of thing is good. It's a little, if there is a shortcut, that's it, okay? But the lovely point to get to is when you start to understand deeply about bass playing and about music, and then you can really dictate your own learning. Bottom line, obviously, is that you need to pick up the bass regularly and you need to get outside the little circle of your comfort zone to learn things that you don't know, whether it's a technique or a song or a piece of music theory that's going to help you compose, write, whatever. I hope that helped you a little bit. If it did, please subscribe to the channel. Next week, I'm going to take you through that 30-minute practice routine that I showed you in that structured approach. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about practice. I think it's probably the big question I get a lot is, you know, what do I do? What am I supposed to practice? That's why I wrote that course, by the way. So if you're interested, I'll put a link below. Check that out. It will give you at least 1 or 2 years worth of stuff to learn, and it will get you up to that level where you can sort of dictate your own journey a little bit more. But if you do have any questions, you're a little bit confused, I want to hear from you. If there's anything I can do to help you, leave a comment below. Let me know. Have a fantastic day. See you next time.